My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic. Certainly not the first cartoon to present lovable characters, detailed worlds, and engaging narratives to its audience of children, but it is one of the earlier franchises that tried to empower the very concept of emotions and personal bonds in an action-adventure setting. A more cynical critique of the show is its way of resolving major villain conflicts with overpowered friendship techniques, but for the casual episodic plotlines, it often accomplished the goal of exploring many nuanced aspects of social interaction between different personalities, with more than a few unfortunate missteps along the way. Of course, to those who have watched the series, these are long accepted truisms, nothing new or mind-blowing. In this video, I want to explore one very specific corner of the show's lore that was barely even mentioned until midway through the 7th season, and use it as a springboard to address some of the real-world mythology that I believe inspired it. From my own viewing experience, I did not anticipate the Justice League-style team-up of legendary heroes that would become known as the Pillars of Old Equestria, largely due to being introduced to 3 at once in the episode Campfire Tales. Of course, giving each of the main 6 their own related quests would have mimicked the key hunt of Season 4 and made it predictable, so the season finale reveal was a pleasant surprise all the same. These distinct characters of legend from around the world having come together as a team of heroes to defeat great evil. Not an original concept in today's entertainment by any means, but there is something interesting about this particular version of it which becomes more evident as we look at each member in turn. We begin with the most prosperous member, Starswirl the Bearded, because I have the least to say about him. As mentor to Princess Celestia and idol of Twilight Sparkle, his use of magic is related to the magical system of the whole series, including a dedicated library section and the half-inventor of the spell that earned Twilight her wings. However, this has left him more as a vague element of world-building and not an actual character until his official first appearance. Said appearance painting him as a grumpy, stubborn jackass.
No offense.
None taken.
Yes, this personality is walked back by the end of the next episode, but we can safely assume that the glimpse we got was the culmination of every accomplishment previously referenced, multiplied by however the limbo dimension affected him for over 1,000 equestrian years. With this, he is the pony version of Merlin. But then, since Merlin is the progenitor for all legendary wizards, you could be forgiven for overlooking the reference. From a key player in the life of King Arthur, to the wise protector of Middle-earth, to the headmaster of a school for teaching magic, the powerful magician with robes and long white hair is a staple of European stories, alongside dragons, unicorns, and even griffins. Now, I am using the term European very loosely, considering a number of other countries we'll be discussing fall within the modern region of Europe. It's merely the colloquial way of saying stories from Britain with a distinct atmosphere. It seriously does not matter what I say about the original writings between 500 CE and 1500 CE, because Merlin has been rewritten, transformed, and subverted by almost everyone since then, along with his contemporaries King Arthur and the Lady of the Lake, and chances are that will not change until the heat death of the universe. Seeing as no one else in our roster has the gravitas of Starswirl, we now have individual origin stories that we can compare to find their sources. And rather than going chronologically with the series, I want to go straight to the 3rd Campfire Tale for more of a thematic continuity in this analysis. A cadet in the Royal Legion, Flash Magnus and his battalion were on a rescue mission through the Dragonlands. With use of a fireproof shield, Flash distracted the dragons and lured them into a lightning storm to save his fellow soldiers and earn the respect of his captain. After the European model, the second most widely known mythology would have to be the Grecian, that of Zeus and the Olympians, of Hercules and the monsters he faced, and of Odysseus's journeys. These examples already include the two most common elements of this style. First is the menagerie of creatures that appear, including the Pegasus and the Centaur, and second is the focus on strong characters with horrible and depressing tales. Flash, however, would seem to avoid the latter half of this definition, so let's do the same for his ancient counterpart. Again, a commonality with Greek heroes is a tendency for one-on-one battles, or being sole survivor after a terrible fate for their team. The one that transcends this would be Achilles, the hero of the Trojan War, and honestly one of the least fanciful stories, short of his immortal baby bath. He did argue against the king he was fighting for over spoils of war, and opted out of battle for a time, during which the Grecian armies started to lose and begged Achilles to come back. I will point out that correlation does not equal causation, and it could have been just a decline in soldier morale after their icon leaves them, but I doubt these soldiers were concerned with statistical theories at the time. Achilles did get his one-on-one battle though, after returning to war, avenging his friend against the Trojan prince Hector and showboating the body around to rouse the troops again. The fall of Achilles by arrow probably aided in the decision to build the famous Trojan horse, conceived by Odysseus before he made his travels home. The idea that strategy would succeed after strength had not. From such perspective, this makes Achilles the greatest Greek tragedy of all. His one and only failure is better remembered than any of his achievements. The sorceress Mistmane was the most beautiful and beloved of her town, but after studying her magic abroad, she returned to find her home in shambles due to the Empress's obsession with her own castle's extravagance. Learning that the Empress, her old friend, was jealous of her outward appearance, Mistmane sacrifices it to restore the town and inspire the Empress to be a more just leader, before leaving again to spread beauty throughout the land. At first glance, this all looks predominantly Chinese, but I did want to make sure before committing to this assessment. Mistmane herself draws visual similarities to Chilean or Kirin of multiple regions, particularly horse-like in Korea. But what about actual characters? Full disclosure, in my cultural ignorance, I began by searching for an Asian story of a girl born from a flower who remained very small, much like Thumbelina written by Hans Christian Andersen. What I was actually looking for is the Japanese tale of the bamboo cutter and his daughter Princess Kaguya Hime, who is beautiful enough to be courted by 5 men, unsuccessfully, then catches the eye of the Emperor, at which point Kaguya reveals herself a deity and flies off into the moon. While not exactly the same story as Mistmane, the relation with both plants and beauty is consistent. But then I discovered a very different story, and it comes with a content warning. As an urban legend, there are a few variations on the origin, but the one that stands out begins with a soldier arriving home from a long war and hearing rumours of a very pretty woman around town. Despite the fact that he is already married, he gets drunk and decides to find her, only to be taken to his own front door. When he finds his wife in bed with another man, he asks her if she thinks herself beautiful, puts his sword in her mouth and slices her cheeks. From that day forth, she becomes the vengeful spirit Kachisake Onna, or slit-mouthed woman, asking strangers if they think she is beautiful and killing anyone who answers incorrectly. So yeah, 2 stories of beauty, one specifically about its tragic loss, but neither one really about sharing beauty with the world. It could be considered insensitive to take vague elements from these separate countries and mash them together like this, but My Little Pony was never made to be a perfect representation for any culture. Fear not though, there is worse yet to come. Not far from England we have Norway, the land to inspire the hero Rockhoof, born as a weakling in a community of warriors. On the day a nearby volcano erupts, the villagers decide to stay with their home rather than flee to safety. Literally the only one to try anything to help, Rockhoof grabs a shovel and starts digging a trench to divert the lava, when he suddenly triples in size and strength, enough to complete the trench and save the village. Later, after spending thousands of years in limbo with his colleagues, Rockhoof is the only pillar to have trouble finding a place in modern Equestria, largely thanks to the decline in necessity for unbridled strength. No pun intended. The solution is to appoint him the Keeper of Tales due to his prowess for oral storytelling, a job that is always in need if you ask me. The parallel of a humble tool possessing great power would make Rockhoof the equivalent of Thor, history's first erased redhead. At first, I wasn't happy with that answer, since Thor is one of the Viking gods and everyone else in this comparison lived as mortals. Powerful mortals who were granted gifts or skills, but mortals nonetheless. Yes, Kaguya was a princess of the moon who was sent to Earth as a punishment, but regardless of how Marvel tells it, Norse legends never reduced the god of thunder to human status. Do you know what that title is missing, though? God of war, god of strength, god of fertility. Yeah, Thor was popular. Likewise, older Scandinavian paintings present the weapon Mjolnir as a stone axe, which was the symbol of lightning and a more common tool over hammers before the Iron Age. One common use for them, binding forest fires by dragging them in the dirt to surround the flames, as in digging a trench. Not that Thor ever did this himself, or fought a volcano as far as I know, but I kinda had to take whatever leads I could get here. In part because I had to repeatedly clarify to Google that I did not want the goddamn Marvel version. This is the one I spent the most research on trying to verify these stories, and I'm sorry that it still feels incomplete. To introduce the final two pillars, MLP actually did give their elemental descendants a corresponding quest, starting with episode 718, Daring Done, and first appearance of Somnambula, one of the few pony characters with a more traditional name rather than a combination of English words often formed into a horse-related pun. Under the tyranny of a sphinx stealing crops, Somnambula begins to inspire an uprising against it, only for the pharaoh's son to be captured. After answering the riddle of the sphinx, Somnambula is challenged to cross the bridge towards the prince blindfolded, which she does, and the sphinx just leaves. I would say that the thematic relation between the element of hope and her use of a blindfold brings to mind the dangers of blind faith, though that is a discussion for another time. The present-day plotline for this episode co-stars the adventurer Daring Do and her #1 fan, previously associated more with the Aztec iconography that inspired a lot of adventure fiction, before also getting subverted itself later in this series to show the negative impact of colonial acquisition.
Yeah, well, you know. Ever been to the British Museum? So. Where'd you get that Sphinx from? Norwich?
But surprise, this one is related to Pinkie Pie's element of laughter instead. From there though, finding Somnambula's real-world ancestor was complicated. In fact, the further down this list I go, the trickier it gets to study. Funny thing about that, instead of an Egyptian tale, I ended up finding a statue called The Sleepwalker, an Italian opera by Vincenzo Bellini, and Somnus, the Roman god of sleep. So no, not even her traditional sounding name is Egyptian. In the opera, Amina is accused of adultery by her fiancé when she is found in another man's bedroom, claiming that she sleepwalked in by accident. Later, she proves her innocence when she sleepwalks across a bridge and almost falls to her death. So taking this plot and incorporating the Egyptian Sphinx into it would appear primarily a choice of variety, though interestingly the riddle part is actually something that Oedipus had to deal with. You know, the Greek dude who killed his dad to bang his mum, then blinded himself. Glad they didn't go down that route for inspiration, huh? Mage Meadowbrook was a healer faced with an outbreak of swamp fever. While observing the flowers that cause the disease, she notices that flash bees are immune and concludes that their honey can be used in the cure. Due to the bees' aggressive tendencies, she needed a specially patterned mask to gather the honey, earning her the secondary title of the Mystical Mask, and making a side reference to plague doctors. Perhaps a snare of lore would be the first mention of her name back in Season 5, crediting her for use of 8 enchanted items when all we ever see is her mask that doesn't seem to actually be enchanted. Now, Fluttershy's quest in this episode rather appropriately revolves around Zecora, the zebra witch doctor who entered the series to represent African people and teach against racism and stereotyping. Success on that front is yet another digression, though one for a later segment. I say it appropriate because Meadowbrook's distinct accent
Mother calls it swamp fever.
places her in the Cajun Louisiana region, which has its own history of racial mistreatment. Anyway, not just legends of the culture, but a traditional occupation is a traitier or faith healer, still in use today alongside modern healthcare instead of fighting against it. Yeah, good work. Credit where credit is due. And Marie Laveau from the 1800s would have to be the shining example for the practice, having worked through multiple pandemics of yellow fever. Devoted Catholic, community leader, activist, orphanage mother, hairdresser, you name it. But then why mention her in a mythology video? Oh boy. I didn't want to get into this just yet, but I'll throw it out here. Please seek first-hand accounts from people of colour. Don't rely on my ignorant white ass. You see, Marie was crowned the Queen of New Orleans Voodoo, which has garnered an awkward reputation in media. Like I said, she followed Catholicism, and the voodoo traditions could be considered as a few extra steps for the routine of rosary beads and praying to loved ones gone, just within this specific community. But that is not the common idea of voodoo, is it? No, that would be witchcraft with a different colour palette. The only thing I'm going to mention about the My Little Pony comic series is that Meadowbrook once cured a town of zombies, which prior to George Romero making them literally dead people, was a shorthand for voodoo slaves. Oh, sorry, I didn't even need to stray that far away to make my point. There's already a direct portrayal of Madame Laveau as a villain in American Horror Story Coven, which I'm not allowed to say if it's appropriate or not. Aside from not having watched it myself.
Oh, that is rich.
Her gravestone used to be regularly vandalized, but now provides guided tours. On the reputation of a woman who gave out free healthcare, I would hope most of that money goes towards cemetery maintenance, otherwise I can't tell which is more disgusting. And let's not forget the first time I personally learnt of her existence as the rumoured creator of a Dr. Seuss knockoff? What the... Meadowbrook, being an earth pony, relies on medicinal chemistry rather than magic, which in the most bizarre of ironies makes this a more authentic version than any others I've found in this entire process, even when she's the one to be based on a real historical figure. Congratulations, DHX, you got one right. Just one. So we have our main 6 heroes, but now we go to the formation of this team. For there is actually a 7th member, Stygian, the one who brought the others together and planned their strategies. While he clearly doesn't have a special item, he can be considered as the pillar's representative of the element of empathy, connected to other villains like Princess Luna and Sunset Shimmer. Well-meaning, perhaps naive, but wanting to do more for the world around him, Stygian borrows the iconography of the pillars to give himself the chance to stand beside them in battle, only to be shunned for such transgression. Growing in anger to this, he finds power in darkness and lashes out. and once too powerful, the only chance to defeat him is for every member to literally vanish from the world, taking him with them. So does he have a legendary counterpart just like the others? Well, not exactly. Shadow monsters are very universal if trying to narrow down a specific origin. From this point, I confess, will be entirely my own interpretation of this character and his relationship to the others, not just tangible evidence. I believe that Stygian fills the role of Central America, not in its native culture, but more its modern-day position. In part 1 of the Season 7 finale, he's immediately shown as the villain, gathering the pillars with the goal to steal what makes each member special and using those powers against them. But whichever way the backstory frames his intentions, his approach is absolutely wrong. Allow me a brief tangent. Through seasons 1 to 4, Friendship is Magic was intentionally structured as a sopica, with the presentation of letters to the princess and later as diary entries. Season 5 established the cutie map that was irregular of use and prioritized the world-expanding journey over the moral destination. And the friendship school that opened in Season 8 doubled the cast but divided the emotional focus even more. While dropping of a solid framework should have allowed more moments of grey morality, in execution a lot of lessons became confusing at best and toxic at worst. This relationship conflict is the former in comparison to other cases, but the root issue actually bleeds into the biggest problem with the pillars of Old Equestria as a whole. They are meaningless in and of themselves. For myself and other fans watching this, we have the benefit of knowing about the elements of harmony and the nuances in their application, having learnt them thoroughly through 7 seasons beforehand, and can easily apply that knowledge onto each pillar by proxy. Any newcomers here know bugger all other than what I've told you, so wouldn't have the same investment if I just start switching stuff around. And thus we have the history of Hollywood, ladies and gentlemen. I don't want to say that the telling and sharing of these epics were a bad thing, but definitely the systemic process that limited their sources was, removing the cultural origin and unique voice behind them. Even the word Stygian is in reference to River Styx of the Grecian underworld. Greece gets around a lot, doesn't it? We also see a struggle against Starswirl, who, as you recall, is the stand-in for Great Britain, the former empire of history looking down on the one which overthrew it and ultimately became more powerful than it ever was. But with reality much bleaker than Equestria, I can't see such an unbelievably perfect reconciliation happening in our world anytime soon. And for the criticism that you all saw coming, this mindset goes on to taint the very show we're talking about. With MLP being a predominantly American production, there's no way to certify how much knowledge or research any of the creative team possessed before they took such inspirations, even the one from their own country, which I just praised them for. The aesthetic similarities for half of these cases aren't too concerning, especially from stories in the public domain, but remember how I described Zecora's purpose in the series? When a whole race of people is excluded from their own depiction, this kind of lesson becomes hypocritical because they fell back on the common media stereotyping often perpetuated by a lack of care and effort, regardless of if it was intentionally hateful or not. Even with the prospect of exploring Zecora's backstory in the cartoon itself, Hasbro declared that it wasn't keen. I mean, probably for the best, but Jesus Christ, people, what was she even here for? I could go on and on and on, and I will, because I did something stupid, something dangerous, something naughty. I did just as much cultural research on MLP and its fandom. But don't worry, it's not going to be boring. I have one more tale to tell, another history turned mystery, if you will, and boy howdy Egypt, you're getting revenge. Move over, Somnambula, or should I say,
السائر أثناء النوم.
Athena, maybe? Oh, never mind. Everybody knows of the pharaoh Tutankhamun, mostly as a punchline, which, if we were going to focus on his family incest, physical disabilities, or original skin tone, does leave him open to a lot of mean-spirited jokes. But no, this is a positive look at the past. The negativity is aimed at our world today, remember? His father, Akhenaten, had previously gone on a campaign to replace old religions with the new, only for Tut to start reversing the damage during his 10-year reign, showing that teenage rebellion has always existed and grown-ups never learn. Egypt's capital was moved from Amarna to Thebes. The previously forced religion of Aten was dropped in favour of older worship of Aman. Numerous damaged temples for Aman were fixed up or even rebuilt, and several festivals and groups were re-established from before. After Tut's death, his advisor Ai was crowned and continued the restoration for 4 more years before his death. Then Horemheb was crowned and bastardized it all. This was chief of the Egyptian army, so military mindset, go figure. And his reign lasted the length of Tut and Ai combined. The capital was again moved to Memphis. Records of Aten and the previous pharaohs were erased and monuments destroyed, and Tut's tomb was buried and built on top of, which counterproductively protected it from looters over the centuries. What we see here is an ideological tug of war, in which Tutankhamun is the hero merely because he chose to build and the others chose to destroy. And history chose the winner 3,000 years later because everyone involved in the conflict assumed that no one was going to dig up a pharaoh. Bloody hell! Okay, in a tragic but bittersweet kind of way, I guess colonialism may have done at least one thing right. So, who wants to guess what elements from that story will be relevant to today's topic? No reward for guessing correctly. I should probably do another content warning for the next few minutes, but I'm pretty sure that all the actual children left after they figured I was trying to teach them. Alongside the social teaching, another milestone that Friendship is Magic hit on, more accidental this time, was the combination of two things. Being part of a larger franchise and toy line built on giving the customers an outlet for personal storytelling, almost to the detriment of letting professionals do so, and the early 2010s rise of a new group of professionals all being on social media, meaning they didn't have to go to the fanfic forums when the fanfic would come straight to them. Unfortunately, certain creative decisions only served as fuel to this fire, namely that they actually listened and let the loudest voices guide them instead of their own priorities. From writing full episodes around canonizing fan concepts, to insulting older generations of the toy line which were never made with the current fan base in mind. Oh, hi me from a minute ago. But then of course they would get caught in the middle between general audiences who point out unintended implications.
I just don't know what went wrong. I just don't know what went wrong.
And those same loud voices getting upset when things just weren't good enough for them personally. 2 episodes, Slice of Life in Season 5 and Fame and Misfortune in Season 7, if played back to back, are both sides of this coin. But it only gets more disturbing from here. In the broader landscape of media, the unexpected rise of bronies was heavily blown out of proportion and mocked, making most decent members hide in shame, and anyone without decency open to express things that should have been very shameful indeed. Voice actor John Delancey made his own documentary with one story framed around the father of a male fan, more about reassuring him that this show wouldn't turn his son gay, instead of how it shouldn't matter if the son was gay or not. Oh, and it goes nice and hard on the autism angle. Piss off! Throughout the show's run, there were a number of cases involving all manner of hate speech, moronic gatekeeping, obviously, child pornography and grooming, but these were then defended with hollow declarations straight from the ponies' mouths before community figureheads with the ability to prevent or mitigate further damage would go full ostrich. Writer and showrunner Megan McCarthy once stated a belief that
no one's bad, they're just broken. And if you can figure out how to fix them, then things will be okay.
But displaying such in the series has only ever reinforced those who use that to excuse genuine crimes, such as, again, pedophilia. It became a horrible case of life imitating art, but worse than imaginable when the show first aired. I do still stand by my description at the beginning of this video. Exploration of character interactions from different viewpoints and situations, with nuance often missed by other shows, even ones for adults. But for every time it fell short, then adding the knowledge that I found on my own incentive, the question is, what good is a kid's show trying to teach morals when its own moral compass seems so questionable? We can all see the parallel themes here, right? The theft of identity, the suppression of knowledge, that truth does not remain buried, and that trying to hide it only ever causes more harm. For anyone fighting for justice today, this could be taken as a message of hope, but it only applies for justice after the fact, when most people still find it convenient to live in a happy fantasy. I myself am not immune from such criticism. My last one, not the whole thing. Initially, this video was only supposed to be a fun deep dive into fictional stories, but obviously reality derailed that plan pretty damn quick. Case in point, look at this. Look at it! This was the conclusion I wrote before doing any research. A hippy-dippy deconstruction of national identity with the sentiment of,
why can't we all just get along?
Which, yeah, would seem fitting for a video about My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. But as I was writing and editing simultaneously, that was not the feeling I had by the end, because it requires me to completely disregard everything I've said up to this point, about all the ways that the dominating force on the planet can swallow anyone's culture and history and vomit it back in their face for a profit. About how all these examples just so happen to be conveniently piled next to each other without any deeper thought on behalf of the creators. About a community, a lot of genuinely kind and smart and fun people of all ages that can still hide such horrendous monsters amongst them. About how I, a YouTuber, an Australian, a white dude, am actively harming my own underlying point to expand opinions and influences beyond the most omnipresent examples by choosing to talk about this omnipresent example. In barely touching on all these cultures, there are so many I never even mentioned, not just with unique stories and styles, but unique perspectives on how to study them. Some which, if granted permission, I at least would like to see expanded on, but that probably just wouldn't be allowed, either by all the individual societies that own them, or the one society that can't let the fuck go of unlimited power. Seeing as no one else in our roster has the gravitas of Starswirl,